It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And we are streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 as well. Didn't think we'd have this kind of a busy news day, but lo and behold, just days before training camp begins for real, on the day that the rookies report to Ashburn, the Commanders have made news as Jason Wright is out as team president. He moves on to a senior advisor role through, at the latest, the end of the year. I would imagine he is going to work on some more stadium stuff as they try to get the RFK bill out of the Senate. And we will, of course, cover that and everything that it means on the show today, tomorrow, and through the next week or so, as this is still going to be a top story as we fully understand what Wright is going to do moving forward. And, of course, where the Commanders go, where they now need to hire a new team president. So what goes into that search, what goes into that role, we will discuss it with a panel of experts over the next couple of days. And it's going to be an interesting thing to watch. We did this, obviously, with the GM search. We did this with the coaching search. Finding new people to work under Josh Harris is one thing that has been consistent, and it's something that we expected. It's been almost a year to the day. It was the 20th last year, so we're 2 days shy of the 1 year anniversary of him taking over the team, and we always knew that this was going to be a possibility. But that leaves us with a look back now. Today, the most immediate thing I think we do is essentially write the Jason Wright obituary in terms of his presidency at the helm of the Commanders. And loosen up my fingers, get to type it. Oh, wait, I already did. Hey, look, a Jason Wright presidency obituary. Jason Wright is a smart person who took a dumb job and then did a mediocre job with it. While a lot of people, including the two hosts who preceded me on this station today, think that Wright was either some DEI hire who was terrible, did a horrible job, deserves no credit for anything, and has no morals, or was the right guy at the right time who did as good of a job as anyone possibly could have and saved the franchise from Dan Snyder, the reality is that neither of those polar opposite takes are true. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and thus Wright's legacy, in a word, is complicated. I've talked with Jason a number of times over the last few years. I've always found him thoughtful, even when we didn't agree or when I thought his thoughts were missing something. I think he did a lot of smart and even some innovative things. I thought he did a few unforgivably stupid things. I have told all of this professionally to his face. He was always professional in return, and I genuinely hope he writes a book one day because some of the things that he's seen are truly and wildly unbelievable, and I'm sure there are plenty of completely and absurd stories that I don't even remotely know about. If I'm writing the Jason Wright Commanders presidency obituary, though, it has to start with the fact that Wright will forever be tied to Dan Snyder, and that colors every single accomplishment and every single failure that he has. He ultimately signed up for that job, something Wright thought he did, understanding what he was doing, working for Dan, and truly, honestly, had no idea what he was signing up for. Because there's hearing bad things. There's seeing things are bad. You remember Wright signed up after the Washington Post story in July of 2020. He signed on in August of that year. And then there's experiencing the bad things and understanding the depth of them on a guttural, visceral, everyday level. And I think it is ultimately fair to criticize Jason for not understanding that up front, that all that smoke was coming from something that was an absolute kerosene fire. It wasn't just like, I know it's kind of bad, but like, I can handle it. Like, if you didn't know what you were signing up for, that's open for criticism for me. I mean, how many stories of ineptitude, abuse, and corruption need to come out for you to be more than weary and or be more ready for what it means to go take that position? It's a blind spot that I've questioned for years, and I think one that Wright himself has questioned at times as well. But he ultimately stuck with it because he thought that he could be a part of the solution, which meant at times doing things that he probably didn't agree with so that he didn't get fired. So as the embarrassing stories, indefensible decisions, and slaps in the face of the fan base stacked up, Wright went along with them. He was playing the long game, not knowing what the end game would exactly be, but knowing he could make things as good as possible through his own lens, in the meantime. And I don't say that demeaningly. Like some of the things, as I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, that Jason was trying to do and in some cases accomplishing doing were worth fighting for. But he was doing that through all of the other stuff that was just unbelievably bad. He would do the things that he thought would help turn the franchise as much as he could, mitigate the Snyder's damage, and hold them off as much as possible, hoping somewhere deep down inside that they'd ultimately sell the team. But that is the nicest version of it. The harsher version is he was a political operative playing the game, even if some of his desired outcomes were things that are good. A better workplace, more profitability, a better standing in the community, all achieved by sacrificing personal morals while working for a man who was morally reprehensible and professionally inept. All of that is why it is so hard to separate Wright from Snyder when we talk about Jason's legacy. It's easier to say either everything good was Jason, everything bad was Dan, and that's a simple and easy narrative, or just everything's on Jason. He's the president, because that's also an easy, clean narrative. But neither is true. That's not how management works, even amongst good, competent people. Nevertheless, when Dan Snyder's involved. Ultimately, the most definitive thing that we can say was Wright either didn't or wasn't capable enough of stopping everything Snyder did. And I want to say, and I almost say here, that he wasn't able to stop the worst of what Dan and Tanya and whoever else was in that very small circle wanted to do. But the reality is we actually don't know what Jason stopped Dan from doing. So maybe he did stop the worst of it. But certainly some got through the cracks. Certainly some got through the filter. Because we're now stuck with a name that floats between universally panned and thoroughly hated.
We are the Commanders.
And do I think Jason and his team probably provided mounds of data to the Snyders with better options? Polling data, popularity amongst fans, focus groups, all the types of things that someone who worked at McKinsey would provide? Yeah, I do. Did they ultimately convince Snyder or find another way to leak it to the press and get crushed with enough time to change it before the official announcement? No, they didn't. So you get to do with that what you wish. You can either say, hey, he tried, or didn't do enough, and either one is true, and thus both are fair. It's going to be an opinion and the beholder of said opinion. Did Wright put his name on everything related to the multiple Sean Taylor botches? Yeah, he did. Do I think those were his ideas or one he was forced to execute to keep his job? The latter. But he still did it. Untying Snyder and Wright in that situation is impossible. For much of the last year, Jason's been working on the stadium sites. I think he set the team up really well in all three municipalities, Virginia, Maryland, D.C., but ultimately we're still stuck waiting on RFK. So there's more work to do in D.C., and I do think that is probably one of the boxes that Jason Wright would like to check before he leaves completely in his senior advisor role. But is it Wright's fault or some random senator from North Dakota with a hobby horse who decided he wanted to score cheap political points at the district's expense that that's still the case? I'd say the latter, but ultimately you can decide how much credit or blame goes there, and we all know that if Snyder hadn't been the owner, the RFK site would have been unlocked years ago. And so ultimately that's where we stand with Jason Wright. Jason Wright was someone who worked for Dan Snyder. He should not be reduced to that. Jason's smart. He worked on major projects at McKinsey, specifically in crisis management, and in that way, he was 1,000% qualified for the role here. He is, and forever will be, the first black president in NFL history. That is a historic achievement and something that is absolutely applaudable and should be celebrated for breaking down that barrier. He hired an incredibly diverse staff that brought a lot of voices into a lot of important meetings that helped lead to positive change and helped ultimately set the stage to revitalize the franchise to the extent that it's been revitalized so far under the Harris administration. And while the biggest factor in the meteoric rises in attendance, revenue, corporate sales, and all of those factors was inarguably Dan Snyder leaving, Jason and his team do deserve tremendous credit for laying the groundwork and ultimately executing on the plans once the sale went through. All of that is real. All of that is good. All of that is worth noting. But it will all fall behind from a legacy standing to the lasting negativity of some of the end of the Snyder era. The rebrand, the Taylor tributes gone wrong, the Twitter admonishment of a reporter, something that had nothing to do with Snyder and was completely Wright's fault, 100% on his own. So when we talk about legacy, when we write the obituary, there's something for everyone. Critics, fans, haters, defenders. Wright's legacy is complicated. He was the last team president under Dan Snyder. And from a legacy standpoint, there's only so much the first part of that sentence, the last, can do for the end under Dan Snyder. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. That's my obituary. We'll take a shorter version on the phones from you. What do you ultimately think of Jason Wright's run in charge of the Commanders as the president of business operations? 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. We're taking your calls next on The Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Taking your calls, 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Jason Wright is out as Commanders team president. Wright, the team, moving forward in separate directions, although not immediately yet. Wright is going to transition into a senior advisor role and then ultimately exit the franchise by the end of the year, so the end of the 2024 season, and a new search for a team president or a search for a new team president is going to be led by Josh Harris and one of the executives at Harris Blitzer. So excited to see where that goes. We'll talk about this a lot more as the show goes, including with you at 301-230-0980. Let's go to our guy Ross in Tampa. Ross, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Am I on, Craig?
Yeah, I got you.
All right, awesome. How you doing, man?
Doing well. What you got on Jason Wright?
Man, I tell you what. Here's the thing with Jason Wright. So automatically he was just in a bad situation because when you shake hands with Dan Snyder, you're an automatic issue in the eyes of the fans. But I think I can't speak for every fan here, but I believe everybody was willing to see how it shook out. I think change was a good thing in terms of the new president because we realized the previous president was just an absolute nightmare. But I would compare Jason Wright's role when he took the job after all the allegations came out with Epstein and all that nonsense. That's like somebody went up to Jason, handed him a water gun and said, hey, you see that big old 3,900 square foot home that's engulfed in flames? Take this and go ahead and spray it out. And when he failed, everybody looked at him and said, a product of Snyder, of course. That's why a lot of people are excited that he is on his way out. But, I look at it on the different side. Yeah, he had a hand in the Sean Taylor botches, and as somebody that's my all-time favorite Redskin player, it didn't sit well with me, the botch of the crest. It didn't sit well with me. I think he did the best he could, and obviously he failed. And when you work for Snyder, that's just an automatic, conclusion, no matter who it is. You can just ask Serrato and Allen. It's just automatic. But, no, I appreciate your obituary because it was as accurate as possible. And I'm a big fan of Chick Hernandez, too, and I didn't really like that altercation. Not an altercation, but I didn't like that whole thing either. So, yeah.
It was with Scott, but
yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah, it was with Scott, Abraham. But, yeah, no, Ross, thanks for the call. And I know we gotta get you back on and tell your wacky story later in this week, so I haven't forgotten about it. But tell people to stop making news, and then we can get to wacky bits. Thanks for the call. Here's what I'll say about the Wright-Snyder dynamic more than I already said, which is I think that the biggest tell of someone in like a president type of role, right? The biggest factors of success are going to be who you hire and who you work for. And for most of us, that's kind of how it is. Like, who are we working with? And if we have hiring power, especially, like, who do we hire? Do we hire good, smart people that do good work? Because ultimately that is a reflection of us. But we're also going to be limited by, it's like your floor is who you hire. Your ceiling is who you're working for. Because you can't overcome working for Dan Snyder. You can't be the greatest team president ever if your owner's not going to give you the resources and empower you to do really excellent, innovative work. But I also think you have to remember, like, Jason came into an unprofessional organization from a staffing standpoint, both in, like, positions that didn't exist that needed to, and important positions that did exist that were filled with people who shouldn't have had them. And I do think that because it was still Dan Snyder's team, you were never going to hire the best and brightest. And so, if you want to say, well, that includes Jason, I mean, it is what it is. I don't know how many other team president jobs he would have gotten at the time. Jason was really young. He was 40 years old. He also got the job because he was working crisis management for McKinsey. The Snyders hired McKinsey. They were basically like, do you want to just do this for us? And Jason was like, yeah, I'll do that. And so he did, and was hoping to, I think, grow with the job. But ultimately, once they get out of crisis management mode and Josh Harris buys the team, like, I think we all knew what the score was. But I do think that, like, some of the reflections that we see in some of the detailed things, like, right, did Jason approve or was it Jason's fault that the crest had the wrong dates on it in terms of the years of the championship? Not inherently, but someone he hired or someone that worked for him it's that person's fault. Like someone typed those numbers in and had it wrong and didn't do the research to understand how the NFL does those dates. And ultimately, whatever quality control process they had didn't catch that. That's really bad. That is a reflection of Wright. I haven't confirmed enough of the details of some of the Sean Taylor botches to say that, like, how much should be on Wright. But clearly, like, those projects were a disaster. From the porta potty thing to trying to use the announcement as a shield on 3 days' notice, from other bad news to the actual statue, if you want to call it, the mannequin itself. Like, all of that's a mess. And people that worked under Wright somewhere on the organizational tree did those things, and that's bad. That's a reflection of the president, ultimately, because who you hire is perhaps the most important thing. But I also understand that when you don't pay people, which is not a Jason Wright thing, which is a Dan Snyder thing, then you're not going to attract the best and brightest. And when you've had an organization ridden with scandal, the best and brightest in all of those fields are not running to come move across the country to your franchise. And so you kind of have to do the best you can with the people that you got, especially when you're one of the first people in. That if you sign up to say, like, hey, I want to make a change somewhere, and ultimately you're making a change with a bunch of people who got you in the mess in the first place, it's going to be tough sledding, and it's not going to be pretty. And for the willingness to do that, I'll say, okay, I'm willing to at least note that in the legacy. Whether you forgive that, whether you think that's brave, like how you, I think that's open to interpretation. But ultimately, that is something that should be said. He was one of the first people in. And that is representative of a lot of things. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. When we get back, we'll go back on the field. We'll get back to Jason Wright and everything going on with him and where this franchise goes from here at 5 o'clock. But next on the field, number 7 in our training camp countdown of the top 10 Commanders for the 2024 season is next. Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. Anthony, where are we at an hour from now? Are we gonna stick with the Jason Wright story and calls? Are we gonna dive into the comments? Are we gonna push never read the comments till tomorrow?
I think we might be sticking with never read the comments today.
Okay, so we'll see how things are going. Either an hour from now, never read the comments, or 25 hours from now, never read the comments. Sometimes it be like that. The one thing I can guarantee, because we're in a breaking news situation with all the Jason Wright stuff, so we will, if we have a guest, transition, whatever, get some experts on the show to talk about all this stuff. But 6 o'clock for sure, unless I guess we had a guest then. But some point during the show today, for sure, we will do our linebacker group preview. We've been doing that every day at 6 o'clock. And right now, it is time for us to get to our next player on our top 10 commanders of the 2024 season countdown. If you need a reminder, number 10 was Dorrance Armstrong. Number 9 was Emmanuel Forbes. Number 8 was Brandon Coleman yesterday. Today, that means we are on number 7, and it is time to let you know who that is.
Number 7
is defensive tackle, Captain John Allen. This was a tough call because trying to separate John Allen and Daron Payne in terms of their importance to the Commanders at this stage is difficult, because I do think that either one could have a big year. I will tell you, Daron Payne is going to be later on this list, and we ultimately decided to put Allen a little lower, the tiebreaker being that Allen is older and more out of contract, or there's less years remaining on his contract. Now, you could make an argument that actually makes him more important because they have to make an extension decision on him sooner. But we decided for 2024 that that and one other reason when it comes to Payne, in terms of his versatility potentially, puts Payne higher on the list than Allen. But when it comes to Allen, his importance is in some level self-important. One, he's a captain, and thus the way he moves about his business day to day in the building, the voice that he has is really important and impacts everyone. I do think guys like Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz come in and become perhaps even more vocal leaders and almost say, hey, like, we're new, we know the coaches, and obviously Wagner's a gold jacket guy, so he can come in any locker room and be like, I'm in charge now, I'm Bobby Wagner. But Allen is still going to be a big voice, and especially, I think, a big voice amongst those that have been around. Those guys seem to have very much bought into what DQ is selling. Certainly, the new direction is the direction. I don't expect any resistance. But there is a value in making sure that everyone's on the same page and maybe you have an understanding of the way things used to be done to ease the transition in a way that, say, Eric Bieniemy didn't give two rats behinds about last year and really hurt him in terms of implementing a new way of doing business. So John, as a sounding board for the coaching staff, as a leader in the locker room, that stuff's all really important. As a player, this defense, unlike Quinn's defenses in the past, is going to be built on the inside out. The spine of this defense is really, really strong. And a lot of players are going to be mentioned in it over the next couple of days of this countdown. Allen is the head of that snake in a lot of ways. His ability to be solid against the run, eat up double teams, split double teams and make plays. He's got a very, very nice pass rush upside. That patented hump move of his, where he's able to get to the quarterback with on a regular basis, is enormously important to a defense that is not loaded at the edge position. It's something we've talked about quite a bit, and we will continue to talk about. They need to generate pressure up the middle, and they need to generate pressure from the second level of the defense, or with second-level guys, Luvu and Davis, becoming essentially modified edge players. But if Allen and Payne, but Allen and Newton, by the way, but if those guys, starting with John, can get pressure up front, it changes the whole geometry of this defense. If you can get pressure with 4 because Allen is inside doing the job that needs to be done, generating the pressure that typically, traditionally from Quinn's defenses has come from the outside, then now that changes what you can do coverage structure-wise on the back end because you don't need to bring extra players. There's nothing better in football for a defense that can happen than getting pressure with 4 guys. I guess getting pressure with 3, but that's just not realistic. Getting pressure with 4 is how you win on the back end because you have everywhere accounted for in your zones. You have the right amount of guys. Nobody's stretched thin. And, you can obviously double then in multiple places, or you double in one place and still have safety help over the top in another. Like, there's just so much you can do with 7 players in coverage versus 6 if you need to bring, or nevertheless 5, if you need to bring 1, 2 blitzers in basically every key passing situation. Otherwise, a quarterback is going to have a bunch of time to throw. So Allen and his ability to win one-on-ones or eat double teams to create one-on-ones somewhere else is critically important to this defense. And as one of the best players on it, that's why he comes in at number 7. I do think that John is probably going to line up mostly in his 3 technique position this year. So that is something that I do wonder about, though. Does he wind up lining up outside at all? He did it at Alabama. They were more of a 3-4, but occasionally he'd just line up on the edge and rush the passer from out there. Does Dan Quinn allow him to do that? I think Payne is the more interesting play there. That's part of the reason that we're going to rank Payne higher on this list. Just how high, you'll find out. But I think Duran's quickness and hand speed and some of his freakish athletic ability versus John's like more technically savvy raw power, that translates better to some of the flexibility along the defensive line. And thus, John slots in, despite the leadership burden. I mean, being the 7th most important guy on a roster of 53 is obviously no small feat and is tremendously important. But that is ultimately why John Allen slots in at number 7 in our list of top 10 commanders for the 2024 season. Anthony, anything else that we would like to add or discuss in the immediacy before we open it up to the phones and get people's expectations for Allen in 2024?
Not nothing I would like to add. I would probably just piggyback off, just his consistency as a veteran. I think that brings a lot of value to the locker room. But also just, something for the young guys to look up to. You have Newton under you. You have Phil Mathis. You have John Ridgway, who's also a young guy. So just being able to, be that model leader in that locker room is huge for a defensive line who we sort of kind of lean on to have a lot of success.
I think one of the things that was really frustrating last year is that was a room that felt like it got out of hand with a lot of the chase stuff. And You're like, wait, John's supposed to be the leader. And I think I think John was battling a lot of personal stuff last year. Not like personal life necessarily. I don't know what John was like. Life was like off the field. I meant personal in terms of like his foot, his injury stuff. He was hurting last year. And I think he was probably incredibly frustrated that he just didn't feel like himself. And that not only means you don't contribute what you're supposed to your team, but also messes with you mentally. And it takes away your bandwidth to be able to deal with other people and be that leader. So I think the foot injury really, really messed with him last year. And I think as we take the calls here in terms of what are your expectations for John Allen, we're doing this through the lens, this whole countdown through the lens of the team. But if we were to do a separate ranking, because we all need more rankings in July, if we were to do a separate ranking of who needs to have the best season for themselves, I don't know that John Allen wouldn't be number 1 on this list. Because they can move on from him after the year at, I believe, 0 cost. So this could be John Allen's final year in burgundy and gold. And unlike a guy like Forbes, where people are like, but Emmanuel Forbes. Like, Forbes is under contract, and he's relatively cheap. So could they cut him if he absolutely bombs just to be like, yeah, we're going to give you a fresh start, and we don't need you around, we don't need people talking about it? They could, but then Emmanuel Forbes goes and signs somewhere else and continues on with his career. John Allen is in a different tax bracket. Like, it's a big, big year for John Allen. Again, so he's number 7 for me on this countdown in terms of the team's lens. I don't know individually if anybody coming off the injury like John did last year and thus the down year has a more important year to their own football career and their future earning potential than John Allen.
I would agree. I I would agree. And to be honest, I feel like guys in their contract years, these are the years that they really go out there and put up some numbers. So
They can, for sure.
you asked about, what the expectations are. I'm expecting a huge year out of John because he's going to want to get, signed
Of course
again.
he does. Of course he wants to go out and earn that extension. And especially if you see, if he sees an atmosphere that he wants to be a part of. I think John longs for the days that he was at Alabama under Nick Saban because he's a sicko and likes that kind of stuff, likes that rigid competitiveness, the discipline, all that kind of stuff. And it just, after years and years and years of not seeing it, you just kind of eventually you give up because it's self-preservation.
Yep.
And I think John kind of gave up on that last year. And that's not me blaming him. It's human nature, and especially with the injury stuff he was battling. But now it's a program that he wants to be a part of. He's in. And so assuming that continues, what does it look like? But I also think he's got to get lucky because health is something you can control to an extent with how you work out, how you prepare your body, how you take care of it, but is also a huge, huge luck factor, especially when you're 6'4", 285 pounds, or whatever John Allen, 6'2", 285 pounds like John Allen is. There's just an amount of physical wear and tear that ultimately luck becomes a factor. So at 301-230-0980, what are your expectations for John Allen for 2024? 301-230-0980. We take your calls on the Hoffman Show next. In case you missed it, Jason Wright is going to exit the Commanders after the 2024 season. Wright is out immediately as the team president. He will stay on as a senior advisor through the end of the season. Russell Westbrook is on the move. A trade today between the Clippers and Jazz is a sign-and-trade that moves Chris Dunn to L.A., Westbrook to Utah, but he is going to be waived, but he's going to go through a buyout process, I should say, more accurately, and then he's going to sign with the Nuggets. So Russell Westbrook to the Nuggets is the too long, didn't read it version of that. And that is what's trending. I'm Craig Hoffman on Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. So, expectations for John Allen this year as we continue our countdown. Number 7 on our list of the most important commanders for 2024. We had Dorrance Armstrong at 10, Emmanuel Forbes at 9. At 8 was Brandon Coleman. And then number 7 is John Allen. I think Allen could have a pretty nice season in this defense. I do think Dan Quinn does such a really good job of creating matchups for his guys. And at times, John Allen is going to be the guy that they choose on any given week to be like, all right, we think you have the best matchup. And how do we move you around a little bit or overload certain places, right? Like if you overload Frankie Louvu on the side opposite Allen, or put him in a certain spot, can you get a slide of the line that guarantees Allen a one-on-one in the matchup that you want? There's like little things like that is a big focus of how Dan Quinn has coordinated over the years that I think is really important to say, like, John Allen's going to have some days this year where things line up for him quite nicely. What does that mean in terms of actual production? 7-8 sacks probably. Can he get, double-digit tackles for loss? I think that's all on the table for him. And again, it comes in a season that's really critical for him in his career. Allen is going into this is his age 29 season. He could get cut after it with only $6 million in dead cap for next year. And they would save $17 million in doing so, which is typically why guys don't get to the end of their extensions. Is either you're like, okay, well, let's sign an extension and get that cap number down, or we are just going to move on from you. Rarely do we actually let you play out the last season of your contract. So for Allen, having the new defense to learn, but also having the opportunities that come with that defense, is that enough to get him an extension? Is that enough to maybe they do just say, hey, we're going to hang tight and, let you play out one more year because you had 7.5 sacks and, the right number of tackles. We liked your pass rush win rate, but it's not like you all of a sudden excelled and maybe he finishes the year hurt and that's just enough to keep him around for another year, but they're not ready to move on. If Newton, what does Johnny Newton do? That matters. What does Daron Payne do? That matters. What do they like in the free agency class? What do they like in the draft class? There's a lot of factors that go into that, but it is without a doubt an unbelievably important year for John Allen on a personal level contractually. And I do think that, Dan Quinn would love nothing more than to have to pay John Allen, than to have to say, like, we're going to give you 2-3 more years at pretty significant money. We can do it right now because our quarterback's on a rookie quarterback contract, and that opens up some cap space. And we love for John Allen to play out his career and retire in 3-4 years as a member of the Commanders because that's a good story. And for a franchise that is short on good stories with recent players, I'd say that the hometown kid gets drafted, survives the Snyder era, has some Pro Bowl years, maybe helps lead the team into the next thing. Like John Allen retires in a couple years after a playoff run. Like that's the kind of story that I think this franchise would like to tell. And so I do think that's worth something in terms of figuring out his future. But ultimately, that's a tiebreaker. That's the cherry on top. The ice cream, if you will, Anthony, the sundae has got to be scooped full of sacks and forced fumbles and pass deflections and being a quarterback's nightmare and also being really solid in the run game. That's what's ultimately going to make the decision long-term about John Allen is how does he play on the field as a dude.
How important do you think – so, we had to go about, changing the culture here, getting it back intact. And I think, you think about the culture here in Washington, you think about Terry, you think about John, you think about, those two players being at the forefront, I guess, of just like what our franchise is and like sort of kind of like represents. So how important do you think it is, for Josh, keep a John Allen? Say he has an okay year. Say he doesn't go out there and, have double-digit sacks or anything like. But how important do you think would it be to still like re-sign a guy like him, considering like what he could possibly mean?
Yeah,
for the
I mean that's the
franchise?
thing, right? Is it actually is not that important anymore?
Oh, okay.
Right? Like I don't know. This is what I actually struggle with, to be honest. Is it important if he's the captain again and whatever, or is it just really easy to be like he still represents something from the past that like we brought in our own guys and we want Luvu to be the unquestioned guy on defense now, along with whoever else, Jordan McGee in the future. Even a guy like Quan, who is a second-year player now, was drafted by the previous administration, but I think is going to be a big feature on this defense and a key guy. Do you want those guys to be the next generation? This is kind of the odd thing with where this team is right now is offensively, we know the dude of the future is Jaden, and because of the position, he gets to start that journey right now. Defensively, they brought in veterans. There is no Aiden Hutchinson in Detroit, franchise centerpiece on the defensive side that's here for the long term. The closest they have to that is Luvu, who signed a 3-year deal. And we'll see. We'll see if he's a Pro Bowler. We'll see if he's an all-pro kind of player. But Wagner, we know, is a placeholder, as good of a placeholder as you could possibly ask for, as great of a leader as existed in this league in the last 2 decades. But how long is he here? I mean, the best case scenario is he's London Fletcher, and he got here. It's crazy because London got here at the same age and didn't play till he was damn near 40, if not literally 40. And he becomes a legend here as well. Maybe that happens for Bobby, but realistically, to count on that is silly. And you want younger guys, younger leaders to emerge and step up. And because they use, I guess Sainer still, 2nd-round pick, but he's a nickel. He's not even going to be on the field every play. So I think the Allen thing from like a franchise, maybe that's even a more interesting question than expectations. We can take calls on this next at 301-230-0980. Like, let's say John Allen's solid this year. Then what? Because I could be convinced either way that you either want to start over or that it shows a level of buy-in that he's the right kind of dude and it doesn't matter the history, and that, hey, John Allen is the player that we want all our other players to model themselves after. There's a possibility that they look at it that way as well. 301-230-0980. We're continuing our talk about the Commanders on and off the field, our offseason coverage presented by T-Mobile. Switch to T-Mobile, and you can get tons of benefits and still save on every plan versus AT&T and Verizon. Use their savings calculator to find out how at T-Mobile.com/switch. Your call's next. I feel like this is the song that Russell and Linnell play for each other every day or every Wednesday and Thursday. Just riding around town singing bleepity bleep you. No?
Maybe. We should probably start playing it. If Matt Essig's listening, Matt, start playing this.
That'd be the funniest start to Win Bag Wednesday.
Yeah.
And whatever you guys call Throwdown Thursday?
Throwdown Thursday.
Yeah.
Yesterday we started the show before, as I introduced him. And by the way, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
As I introduced him, he had been on Infinity Sports Radio Network as a host yesterday morning, and he was talking and making a point about college football or something about athletes getting paid. And he was like, sometimes you think you're better than your work colleague or people that you work around and that you deserve more. So I went back and had Matt cut that up, and that's how I introduced him.
That's a good bit. That's good radio, Chris Russell.
I mean, because if that isn't Linnell, I don't know what is. Like where he doesn't think I'm listening, and I'm listening him basically throw me under the damn bus.
I mean, in his defense.
Or you, or Kevin Sheehan.
I was saying, in his defense, why would he think you, of all people, were listening? You have to hear him for 3 hours on your own show twice a week.
Because I am a glutton for punishment.
That is true. Chris Russell has joined us in studio here on the Hoffman Show, still floating around. Of course, you can hear him between 1 and 4. I don't know. Maybe you have something more important to do than me categorizing it as floating around. But
well, I mean, I was dealing with Linnell, right? Because there's a lot of things to deal with in that regard. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
And then I was about to leave, and Anthony came out and said,
hey, would you want to talk about the Jason Wright stuff?
Yeah. Would you mind staying around? And Linnell looked at me and was like, I got to go home. And I was like, well, okay, I guess I'm staying to talk to Greg.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate it. Of course, the big news for those that are just tuning in and haven't seen it, Jason Wright is going to move out of the Commanders at the end of the year. He is effective immediately, no longer the team president, a senior advisor. My guess, Chris, is that he's going to work on the stadium stuff for the rest of the year. I would guess in a transitionary kind of way. Transitionary, is that a word? Whatever that word's supposed to be, where they will hire the new person. Mm-hmm. Jason will make sure that all the people that they've been working with on Capitol Hill, that person gets introduced to and knows if they don't already, which I do think becomes an interesting discussion in terms of who they hire as the next president. Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of different factors, from partnerships to NFL knowledge to being connected on Capitol Hill, something you need in D.C., and you don't need to be the team president of any other team. But as you think about the legacy of Wright, what do you think about, what's the short version for you of his president stint's obituary?
So, I mean, I don't know what you've said in the first hour, so I'll just acknowledge that I haven't heard your stance on this, right? We've talked a little bit, but I haven't
all the more fun.
Right. So here's my stance. He was hired 4 years ago next month at a time of complete upheaval and complete turmoil and facing, as I called it, Craig, a Mount Everest-sized mountain of stuff in front of him, okay? And look, he made some colossal mistakes. There is no denying that. I don't even think if Jason was being honest with you face-to-face, privately, that he would say, I didn't make colossal mistakes.
I don't think Jason will mind sharing. I can confirm that is the case.
Okay.
He does not think he did a perfect job. The extent to which he did or didn't, I think, is probably would be depending on who he's talking to.
Right.
But he by no means thinks that he does in hindsight a perfect job.
That being said, here's how I approached it, and it was certainly not met with a lot of regard from Linnell, and most of the audience, I can't imagine, agrees with me, is, hey, man, listen, he made some colossal mistakes. He didn't do good enough, but he did do some good things. And ultimately, when I remember his almost 4 years here, or I guess it'll turn out to be 4 years plus, under this revised agreement, when I look back on it, I'll say, look, again, made the colossal mistakes, faced an insurmountable mountain of tasks, could have done better, but did some good things to revitalize the fan base even before Josh Harris. And that was easy once Josh Harris and his group took over last July, but it was not easy before that. And what I pointed to, and again, maybe I'm wrong, not the first time, not the last time, but I pointed to this, Craig. in 2021, coming off of, yes, a fake division-winning year or whatever you want to call it in 2020, in 2021, they had an average of like 52,000 and change, I think 52.7 in attendance. In 2022, meaning the Carson Wentz year, they went from 50, I think it was 52 and change, to 58.1 in terms of average home attendance, almost about 6,000 or so increase. And that was before Josh Harris and mostly before Dan Snyder announced his intention to sell the team. So to say that that isn't something that was good, something for Jason Wright to hang his hat on, I think is irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would have to go back and look at the schedule. Like, that could be the difference in playing the AFC and NFC West versus the NFC Central and AFC North, where all of a sudden you have one game full of Baltimore fans, and like it's an easier commute for away fans. And so, like, I'm not going to argue with your overall takeaway, because I actually mostly agree with it. Some of your data points I think could probably be picked apart, which is Linnell's job. So I'll go to the
well,
bigger thoughts.
He didn't pick apart the data points. He just completely ignored it and said it was irrelevant. And we thought about the schedule right now. I know Pittsburgh wasn't here, but I'm sure Green Bay was. We can go through the schedule.
Not to get caught up on those kinds of details. Right. I think. When I think of the good stuff that Wright did, to me, it's he professionalized a lot of aspects of the franchise. I think Rivera, I don't give Rivera a lot of credit for a lot of stuff, but Rivera deserves some credit for some of that as well, where the administrations that were running things before were such clown shows and so unprofessional that they didn't literally have the jobs to exist, nevertheless some slappy in them to do them. And when Jason got here, he was like, we need a lot more people doing this work. They created an HR department. So, like, some of that was his crisis management background from McKinsey, which is why he got the job in the first place, and being like, we need an HR department. Yeah. And then others were more like, okay, now that we've got an HR department, how do we beef up our sales staff? How do we beef up our marketing teams? How do we do these types of things? And while there was a ton of turnover in those positions, at least the positions existed. And ultimately, now that Josh Harris is in charge and it is a more desirable place to work by miles and miles and miles because of that fact alone, nevertheless, that Josh Harris will pay people, and Dan Snyder was notoriously cheap. I mean, I'd heard at one point, like, the average salary here was like less than half of like requisite positions around the NFL.
I know at least in one example, it absolutely
where like
was.
If someone else was making $85,000 for job X at the Chargers, it was $40,000 a year here. So you're just not going to get good people.
And you're going to get a lot of turnover, and that included during Jason Wright's tenure.
For sure.
Well, let me ask you this. I know this is your show, but let me ask you a question. Because
take the thinking off my plate, Chris. Be my guest.
You're very sophisticated, and I'm not. Would you say that Jason Wright's achievements and accomplishments are much harder to publicly identify and celebrate if you're the common fan and even media member, as opposed to his colossal failures?
Yeah. Oh, I think that's inarguable, right? And I think that's why it makes the legacy conversation that we, of course, have to have instantly the second we hear the news, because that's what we do, because we're sports radio. It makes it so difficult, right? Yeah. Something like, hey, he professionalized the behind-the-scenes stuff that you never see directly. But
nobody cares about human resources if you're Joe fan.
Right, exactly. And nor do you really think that you care about getting nicer banners around the stadium or a better video board and all that kind of stuff. But you actually do. Like, it kind of intrinsically and untangibly positively affects your fan experience, but also does that overcome those little subtle things that you don't even realize are happening to you, overcome the colossal disaster that was anything related to trying to honor Sean Taylor?
Yeah. I mean,
absolutely not.
I mean, the Sean Taylor thing was a disaster in multiple ways, right? I mean, there was the picture in front of the porta potties. There was the mannequin. I still don't understand, quite honestly, from the mannequin perspective, just from that, why they didn't have, like I pointed this out a ton, I'm sure you've talked about it, why they didn't have long sleeve shirts, like which football players wear all the time to cover up the mechanical arms. I don't understand how little details fell through the cracks.
I think that there's some more behind-the-scenes storying to that specific thing that hasn't necessarily – I don't have it on good enough authority. I'll tell you in the commercial break, and you might go, oh. which I'm sorry to do to the listening audience.
all
It's just like that's sometimes how reporting works is you hear something, but it's not on enough authority that you can report it. But at the same time, like ultimately, your job as the president is to kind of be that final stopgap to stop whatever Looney Tunes is happening, and make sure you're not. But also, like in fairness to Jason and anyone else involved in that project, like even if they were put in a bad spot where I don't know what were they going to do, actually say no. Like the Taylor family did sign off on that. So and that they then use them as like a defense shield. So like there's a lot of complicated stuff where you're just like the easiest explanation for this colossal mess up is they work for Dan Snyder. And I think that was my ultimate, kind of headline and ultimately closing line of my obituary that I wrote for the presidency of Jason Wright, is that he is someone who worked for Dan Snyder. He was the last team president that worked for Dan Snyder. And I think he has a role in helping get Snyder out with the way he worked with the NFL and whatever strings he may have been pulling and people he was talking to behind the scenes. Maybe he was one of the people saying, like, Dan, it's better for the franchise if you got to go. I'm sure that there were some tough conversations between the Snyder family and Jason as a representative or what. I don't know how that ultimately went down. How Dan was, I'm guessing it was probably more of like the Jerry Joneses of the world or whoever else that made Dan see the writing on the wall. But I do. So there's like, one, you took the job, which says something about you. There is some level of ambition that overrid whatever breaks should have been in place to be like, I don't want to work for Dan Snyder.
Whatever
in that
moral
role.
compass you have,
And then two, I do think, so that's like one negative, but on the positive, the way that the organization was able to hit the ground running under Harris has to, on some level, be given credit to Wright, which is why I think his legacy is so complicated.
That's a good point. I didn't bring that part up. I just said, well, okay, if we're going to give, because Linnell's point was everything that happened good last year was because of Josh Harris buying and Dan Snyder leaving, nothing to do with Jason Wright. But, of course, I was trying to point out that there was already a positive transition towards the turnover, if you will. And one of the examples that I brought up is everybody thinks, well, the grandstands, the temporary grandstands were just dropped in between the time that Josh Harris officially bought the team a week before training camp and then day one of training. And that was not the case. That was already in. Now, maybe it was because they knew they were going to get a new team owner, and that was something that was smart to do. Yes. Understood that.
My best guess there.
That project was already underway long before Josh Harris took over.
Well, my best guess is like they knew Dan was selling, right? So they probably started planning that in the beginning of the offseason. They didn't know who was going to be signing the check, but they were anticipating whether it was Jeff Bezos or Josh Harris or whoever. I don't even remember who else was involved at this point because I tried to
Fertitta.
Yeah, Tillman Fertitta. That if they were going to spend that much on the team, dropping a couple grand on the grandstand and putting together a proper training camp was going to be high on the list of things to do, and they laid the groundwork for that.
Exactly.
And I think you also have to be a pretty naive dope, to use one of your favorite terms, to think that there wasn't some kind of coordination before the thing went official. Like, now they had to be careful, and there's a lot of rules, but like I'm sure that there was some, was it Morse code signals that went back and forth between once we all knew it was going to be Harris and Wright's people to be like, hey, we're thinking about this. Blink 58 times if you think that's a terrible idea. Oh, they only blinked 3. Like, there had to be some of that. And to navigate that takes some tact, takes some depth, takes some skill. But it also doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of, like, at the end of the day, I think there also then is like, okay, well, if he did that stuff and deserves credit, then why doesn't he get to keep going, right? And I do think this is where we talk about some of the, okay, would a better person have avoided some of those mistakes that Jason made? Perhaps. Certainly perhaps. I also think a better person wouldn't have taken the job, but I do think that Harris understands that landscape because of where he sits in business and with his other sports businesses, and he understands the caliber of person. And all these things that we're talking about, Jason can both get credit for and get credit for doing well and acknowledge that anybody else who's qualified for that position probably could have also done them equally well.
Yeah, I'll just point out this last thing for me is if Jason was so bad at his job and Josh had so little regard for him, he would have been out, A, a while ago, I think. B, he wouldn't be allowed to continue beyond the expiration, we believe, of his contract, which is next month, in whatever this role is, in which Jason, via statement, said, I'm going to maintain the same responsibilities as I've had. Essentially, the nuts and bolts of the statement. So if he was so bad, if he was so incompetent, I think, and Josh identified that, I think he would have been out a while ago, or out now, or out when his contract expired. Instead, he's basically being allowed to stay on in this transition period to the new president, which, mind you, helps the new president in that transition. There is no denying that. So there is an advantage to it. But again, if he was so bad, so incompetent in Josh Harris's eyes, and everybody seems to trust Josh Harris, then Jason would have been out either a while ago or now, period.
Yeah, if he was that terrible, no. I think Jason Wright is qualified to be a team president of an NFL team. Do I think that he is the best possible person for that job that exists on the planet? No, not based off of what we've seen, which I think is fair. And, like, that doesn't mean that in 15 years Jason might not be that. Like, I'm not trying to be just extra nice, but I'm trying to be humane about it.
Yeah.
Like, Jason took the job when he was 40.
Yeah.
He's a young man. And so who knows what experiences he learned from and will continue to learn from and whatever. But, like, are there people – like, Josh Harris is about getting the best people. And so it doesn't really matter what Jason Wright is right now. If he's not the best possible person for the job, Josh Harris is going to go pursue that. And I'm excited to see who he finds. Because I think you could look at the NFL. I think you could look at some people, maybe even on Capitol Hill. Like, do you go find some chief of staff of a senator or whatever and that knows the inside and outs of Congress that you need to get stuff done for RFK and knows the D.C. business community really well? Like, there's a bunch of different options in a bunch of different places in the sports and business and political worlds that you're going to search for someone to be this team's next president of business operations. And knowing that the football operation is already in great hands with Adam Peters, I think is the thing that fans care the most about, even if your fan experience will actually probably be, well, I won't say more impacted because the emotion of being a fan is most impacted by the football, but if you interact with the team, will be heavily impacted by whoever this person is.
Yeah. I just don't want a hardcore nuts and bolts bean counter that is going to hold this team back. If Adam Peters wants to, on the football side, pursue a big-time free agent, whoever that might be.
I don't think that this person
I just
will
don't
have
want that person to have the ultimate authority to overrule something in football operations.
I don't see why they would, because ultimately they're two different budgets. Like, of course, there's an extent of budgeting in terms of the franchise losing or making. Like, the person on the business side's job is to make the revenue.
That's fair.
That Josh Harris loses less money on the bottom line. But there's a salary cap and a salary floor, and you got to hit it. So when it comes to the free agent spending and how the salary cap allocation, I do think that is different. Although I will say, like, the Snyders were so cash-strapped that stuff was a factor. The cash was a factor.
Yes.
And I do think that's something that Jason had to manage because that was part of his job because he was the cash guy. I don't think that's the case anymore because money is fake to
and
like,
also
the amount of rich people that are in this ownership group.
But one other thing I'll just add, it could be in other areas that the squeeze is felt, right? Like if they don't feel like, oh, we've got to take, the big dual aisle jumbo jet to Dallas, right? We can drive all the equipment there and we can take, the smaller plane to save a little money. Like, that's what I don't want any part of that. I want the organization to be run like an NFL franchise that actually makes money, because it does.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair. And that's the kind of person that I think Josh Harris is going to go find. So we'll see where he finds him. Chris Russell, 1 to 4 weekdays here on the Team 980. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Greg.
You're dismissed. Class is dismissed. Go home.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
All right. When we get back, never read the comments. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube as well. On the, live as YouTube as well at the Team 980. Heck of a time for me to mess up the YouTube plug, Anthony, considering what we're about to do, you know?
Yeah, it sounded like you just tripped over your words.
Yeah, I did. I was making sure that I was all set. I had everything neat, organized, ready to go. And apparently what was not organized and ready to go was my thoughts. Whoops. That's okay. We're ready to go now. Anthony, are you ready over there? Hazmat suit is on?
I think so.
All right, let's dive in.
We tried to warn them. They didn't listen. Every week, the Hoffman Show goes into the belly of the beast.
We read those comments, baby.
Never read the comments.
All right, here's how this works. We cut up our show, which is 3 hours live daily here on the Team 980, 4 to 7 p.m. We cut up the segments. We put them on YouTube. Then people treat them like piñatas, and they batter and bruise them until they bust open. Actually, that's not how YouTube segments work. You just leave the comments on them. You let us know what you think of what we say, and then we take the most interesting comments, or the ones we feel like responding to out loud, and at 5:30 on Thursdays, we do never read the comments here on the radio. So, biggest topics this week, starting with what Joe Theismann said on our show about Jaden Daniels, which is that he should not play in the preseason. I would say between the comments on Joe's interview that we had in like the original piece and then my commentary where I said I disagree with Theismann, most of the people actually agree with me. Not that that's about me. They agree with what I said versus what Joe said. I'm not going to make it personal because in a popularity contest between me and Joe Theismann in Washington, D.C., I think I would lose to Joe Theismann. And Anthony, I don't think that's a bold prediction.
I don't think it is either.
I don't have a Super Bowl ring or an NFL MVP. But in this particular case, I do seem to have the more popular take, which is that Jaden Daniels needs to play in the preseason. Joe T says, not so much. Comments confirming that, like the one from Billy. Billy Sulcer 1062 says, I agree, Craig. He needs the experience. Thanks, Billy. And that's the crux of it for me is like, I think Jaden getting a little bit of that experience, not having it be so new when he gets out there in the preseason is better than just being so risk averse that you actually risk, because you're risk averse to injury, you risk him not being actually ready to play. At DSZ6886 says he needs to be out there so he can apply that game speed to what he's practicing. Go to bed, old man. Okay, hold on. We don't need to be rude to Joe Theismann. We don't need to tell Joe Theismann it's time to go. Anthony, who let that comment in there?
I think the comment section itself.
Oh, I think, yeah, we should do more. Can't be telling Joe. Joe was out on the West Coast playing golf. He was very nice to join our show. We can disagree without telling him, go to bed, old man. Come on. Very, very rude. At Mikey Krita Flash 9193. By the way, I was just talking to Russell as he was leaving us. He's probably in his car listening to this, knowing exactly what I'm about to say. He said his favorite part of Never Read the Comments is me reading the screen names. He'd be like, "You're talking to Slappy Poo 92," and I'm like, "Yep, that's just sometimes what happens." I do screen them enough that I know I'm not going to curse. Outside of that, whatever comes out, comes out. But I thought this was... Oh, no, it's the next one. It was aluminum floor pour that made my favorite point. But Mikey Krita Flash 9193, I do this for a living, says, "I feel Joe Theismann has a valid point. I don't want Jaden Daniels out there unless coach plays all 11 offensive guys who are at the top of the depth chart. I've seen how coaches approach preseason for years now. They evaluate training camp. I expect them playing in the second preseason game, and then that's it." I actually do like this point from Mikey Krita Flash, which is, yeah, you're not going to stick Jaden Daniels out there behind a bunch of backup offensive linemen against a first-team defense and be like, okay, let's see what happens. Like, that's not very smart. And that is the unfortunate reality for one of the quarterbacks down the roster, potentially, depending on how certain teams line up. But I actually don't know that you're going to see a lot of ones defensively in the preseason games for the Commanders because, in part, you got joint practices and, are they going to risk those snaps for more veteran defenses, especially the Jets, who have played together and have a bunch of high-end talent that they don't want to get hurt. But I do think, Joe T made a good point. You're not putting him out there behind a backup offensive line. My counter would be, right, you're not going to put him out there behind a backup offensive line. You're putting him back out there behind the starters because they also need the work in this new offense to come together, et cetera, et cetera. This was, I thought, a really, really tremendous point from Aluminum Floor Pour. Again, I don't make up the screen names. They sound like I do, but I don't. But he says, "I think Joe's overlooking a prime coaching point, and that's how Jaden learns. He's self-identified as someone who learns by doing, and I've heard all offseason about the virtual reality so he can learn by doing. I think a couple series for a guy who learns like that is a real positive for the franchise." That I 1,000% agree with, right? It is something that we know Jaden Daniels learns by doing. It's why the virtual reality was so effective for him. It's something where he can essentially see it and do it and act it out and go through visually, like his eyes and the way they attach to your brain are intaking that as if you're doing. It's not the same as looking at it on a 2D screen and watching film. It's the ability to kind of live the experience and at the speed of what he needs to see. Well, what's better than virtual reality? Reality. Preseason game is as close as you're going to get. So I think that's a tremendous point by Aluminum Floor Pour. On to our next biggest topic of the week. Brandon Ayuk. Yeah, should the Commanders pursue him? What's going on with the contract? What's going on with his trade request? The whole thing. And it does start with something, the comments do start with something that, I'll admit, this is something that happens sometimes in July. But, oh, God, this is a disaster of a screen name. There are so many letters on my screen right now. Philly Mondorm Mamu 8178. We're going to call him Phil. Phil says, "News about a TikTok?" Yeah. I mean, Ant, happy July?
Happy July.
To quote young Anthony Haney, sometimes it be like that.
Yep.
Sometimes it'd be like that. But when the TikTok is of your playbook from another player or another team's player who's best friends with your starting quarterback, and your GM is the former assistant GM where that guy plays, that all of a sudden does become, especially in the middle of July, your news. So there's that. Anyway, once we get past Phil's comment, which, again, fair point, Wayne Kerfu says, "I'm 50-50 on him. It's weird because I haven't heard anything bad about Ayuk till this offseason, so I don't know if that's just who he is or if it's just actually because the contract or the behind-the-scenes stuff. I think that when it comes to players in contract disputes, they do what they, like, it's very, very personal. And I think these are young men who are very on social media, and they feel like they can publicly pressure their way into getting what they want. they know that if they are public with their side of it, that their fans and fans of the team who are fans of them are more likely to take their side, and they think that can affect the negotiations. And I think the other part of this, and especially when you look at, say, the Niners specifically, it doesn't seem to hurt. Deebo Samuel was pretty rough a couple off seasons ago with some of the stuff that he was talking about and how public he was. How many other players have been super public and then ultimately at the end of the day, they get the contract? I don't know it's because they actually changed the leverage or it's versus there have been also plenty of guys who shut up and just don't show up or do show up and keep negotiating behind the scenes and all of a sudden deadline spur action. But this is what happens. I don't think it's really that big of a reflection of character. I think it's a reflection of this is a guy who thinks he deserves more money. He's going into the final year of his deal. He plays a sport where injuries happen and nothing is guaranteed. And the more money you can get guaranteed sooner and the more uncomfortable you make people, the more likely, at least logically, following that logic, if you think that's actually logic, the theory is the more uncomfortable you make them, the more you get that guaranteed money sooner. So that I won't judge Ayuk's abilities or his kind of where he is as a teammate or anything like that based off of how he handles this unless he goes wildly out of pocket. Although I do think putting another team's playbook on the internet, even if it's just one single screenshot, is a little bit to a lot out of pocket. The Mad Centrist 9396 says, keep him away from Washington. He's too much trouble. He's the kind of guy the old ownership would want. Why not ask Dan Snyder to come back as well? The Mad Centrist. If you think that bringing in a wide receiver who doesn't seem to be a diva in terms of demanding catches, targets, anything like that, first we've ever heard of divaness, any kind of issues, anything remotely approaching that category with Brandon Ayuk is about his own contract. Is anything similar to Dan Snyder? I need you to go take a Dan Snyder refresher course, and in the meantime, stop talking. Like, I still don't know that enough of, like, yes, he was toxic for the football team. Y'all realize, like, he was a criminal. He's charged with crimes and is under investigation for crimes. Like, y'all got to stop with the Snyder stuff at every freaking turn. It's annoying, and it makes you sound incredibly out of touch with reality. Yes, they name chased. But you want to know what happens when you pursue good football players, which a lot of other competent teams have done? They name chase because the guys with the names are often good. And this isn't some over-the-hill crap football player who's on the wrong side of his prime. He's a 26-year-old entering it. He had 73 catches for 1,300 yards last year, I think are the numbers. It was like mid-70s for 12 or 1,300 yards. He was a second-team All-Pro last year. You know who also pursues that kind of player? The Rams before they won a Super Bowl. So just because you go trade for a name doesn't mean that you're Dan Snyder. So stupid. Who told you to be that dumb on the internet? No one. Why did I just react that violently? I don't know. That's the point of the segment, I guess. Or that's what happens organically in the segment. Sometimes, Anthony, I just cannot help myself.
Yeah, and I feel bad for you sometimes, you know? I feel bad for you sometimes.
You can just help me help you, or you help me. How's the saying go?
You want me to help you help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Normally it's let me help you. I don't. Help me.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I think that's bad.
I think that's what it simply comes down to. All right, last one on Ayuk. This was actually an interesting question. Big Griff 54 says, what makes Brandon better? Since we asked and you answered. Because I think this is in relation to McLaurin. And the answer is Ayuk. The best answer I can come up with is Ayuk plays bigger, and I think he's a little bit better route runner. He's a more explosive athlete, but Terry has got better long speed. Like, Terry's the better runner. If you look back at their NFL Combine scores, 40-yard dash, Terry ran a 4.35. Ayuk ran a 4.5, but Ayuk has been a tremendous vertical threat. Terry has been at times. But I think Ayuk is better, releases off the line, things like that, so he's able to actually get out and get open deeper. He's also playing in a significantly better offense schematically, and he's surrounded by significantly better players. So honestly, I don't know skill-wise. I'd have to talk to someone like Logan or Santana who's watched a bunch of tape on these guys and has that super nuanced understanding of wide receiver to be like, okay, well, if you subbed Ayuk and Terry, what do the numbers look like? But on a baseline level, I do think he's a slightly better route runner. He plays a little bit bigger. He's got a 40-inch vertical. Terry's got a 37.5. 10.8 broad jump for Ayuk. 10.5 for Terry. So again, that little bit more of just pure raw explosiveness, even if Terry's a little bit stronger and a little bit faster. Ayuk is also a better blocker. Terry's willing to block. Terry's tough as could be. But when it comes to the actual skill of blocking, Ayuk is one of the absolute best in the league, which is obviously critically important in San Francisco with the kind of offense that they run. So that's kind of the differences between the two. They're similarly sized, etc. Again, I think Ayuk plays a little bit bigger, but that's kind of where we're at with those two guys. On the non-Commanders front, we had Josh Robbins on yesterday to talk about Alex Sarr's 0-for-15 night. And, wow, it was met with the kind of rationality that definitely Summer League performances deserve. Not. At Greg B, 67.99 says, I watched the game. Sarr is not good. He has bad hands. He's soft and doesn't like the paint or the contact that comes with it. He doesn't want to play the 5, but he's not a stretch 4 or power 4. Bad pick. Probably the worst pick in the lottery. On the flip side, Carrington could end up being the steal of the first round. I would just like to say that if you are ever this declarative about something after Summer League, I have every right to come on the radio and clown you just by reading your comment and saying, that's all that I need to say. It's Summer League. He hasn't even started his career yet. He hasn't had a training camp. He hasn't been in the Wizards' weight room. Maybe it was for a day before they left for Vegas. What are we talking about? Also, he doesn't have bad hands. He's not soft. He doesn't play as a power player in the paint. He's also not being asked to right now. It's something that will come with time as he grows because he's 19 years old. And then there's this one. Just when I thought it couldn't get dumber. In response to Greg B's comment, we have Noah Linden. At Noah Linden says, I'm not sure why he was the number 2 pick. His college stats aren't impressive. Many players selected later in the draft, like Zach Edey, had far better college stats and are playing brilliantly in Summer League. Anthony, I have a question for you. Where did Alex Sarr go to college?
He didn't.
Really is going to hurt your college stats, isn't it?
Yeah.
By the way, is every great college player a great NBA player?
No.
Is everyone who's great in Summer League a great NBA player?
No.
Are there guys who struggle in Summer League and then turn out to be great NBA players?
Yeah. A lot of people, actually.
Yeah.
Jaylen Brown, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of contract he just signed?
One of the biggest ever. 5-year, 304, something along those lines.
And then didn't he win Finals MVP?
I think so.
Yeah. I'm not telling you Zach Edey might not turn out to be a decent pro. I'm telling you that his Summer League performance has nothing to do with it. Yes, I think it was pretty easy last year to see that Victor Wembanyama was going to be awesome in Summer League. But you knew that from watching him in France. You knew that from watching everything, but he is a prodigy. Alex Sarr is not that. He's going to be asked to do specific things. He's being asked to do more than that in Summer League in a very different context against different opponents with different challenges. He has also not entered the player development program yet. He is a raw piece of clay. You are watching a raw piece of clay play basketball. That's all. That's all. There's some instinct stuff that you can see. And by the way, that stuff's pretty good. Shows a good instinct for moving the ball, where he's supposed to be defensively. He's got good timing on shot blocking. A lot of intangible, unteachable stuff that's already pretty good. A lot of stuff that you need to get working on. Skill-based stuff that is not very good yet. And if it doesn't improve, yeah, it's not going to be a great pick. But guess what? The stuff that needs to be improved is mostly coachable. And they have coaches. Because when you get to the NBA, you're not a finished product. And just if all you had to do was look at the Naismith Player of the Year in college every year and be like, that guy's the number 1 pick, then scouts wouldn't get paid what they get paid and GMs wouldn't get paid what they get paid. It's a lot more complicated than that. No one told you to be that goofy on the internet. This is why we never read the comments, and then we do once a week. We allow ourselves, and we vent out the frustration of the silliness, but also take down some bad takes because sometimes they deserve it. And then sometimes we just have straight up fun with some takes. Anthony, this week on both the Hoffman, at Craig Hoffman page and the Hoffman W Sports page, we had record-breaking weeks with our YouTube shorts, which is very fun. They're like Reels, TikToks, whatever. Also, first time I ever went viral on TikTok was this past week. I think we're approaching like 500,000 views on that one TikTok.
Which one?
It was a TikTok about Angel Reese's rebounding.
Gotcha.
And on the Hoffman W Sports page, it got over 30,000 views on Reels and counting. We put the same reel up on at Craig Hoffman page, and it got like almost 15,000 and counting. And then on TikTok, same exact thing. We just put it on TikTok because that's how the content game works. And it has like almost 500,000 views. First time I've ever gone viral on TikTok like that. I was like, this is nuts. I need to get out of these comments now. I am literally never reading these comments. I couldn't possibly read all of them. And man, are there some funny ones. There are some genuinely hilarious comments on this from both Angel Reese lovers and defenders and Angel Reese haters. And I will just say, the content itself was about Angel Reese's streak and it being over, and also, saying like, hey, Angel's a really good player, but this was silly. The way she was extending the streak was silly. It doesn't change who she is as a player. I'm not obsessed with round numbers. This doesn't actually say anything. And that was kind of the point. And then people, of course, they don't care. They just see Angel Reese and they have to get off their Angel Reese take. Or they then want to make it about Caitlin Clark, who was not mentioned at all in the video. But this gets even better when I read the screen name. God is Love 9273. God is Love 9273 says, no matter how you spin it, Reese is a double player. To which I responded, she's two people? Because her double-double streak got broken?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's going to average a double-double. She's very good at achieving 10 and 10. Or 10 plus and 10 plus. Whatever. This one was so funny. I didn't even realize this till a bunch of people started to point it out. In that clip against New York, or in that last possession against New York, where she kind of like got quadruple teamed and threw the ball over her head and all that stuff. Do you realize how badly she traveled?
I didn't pay attention to that.
Oh, go back and watch it. It's horrendous. I'll bring my phone over in the break and I'll show it to you. But Mr. Happy 1245 says she travels more than a league of 6-year-olds. That's my favorite, when the 6-year-olds, one dribble into both hands, take 7 steps, one dribble, pivot, turn. It's like every time they change directions, they feel like they have to dribble. I don't understand the brain chemistry there, but I thought that was hilarious. And then I got a lot of comments like this. And Anthony, I'm gonna make you defend my honor here. At Chris Joseph, not the Syracuse one. This guy spells it wrong. At Chris Joseph 6491. He actually spells a lot of stuff wrong, but that's not the point. I hate when people that don't hoop make takes. Any record was planned to be broken. LeBron, Russ all tried to break records. The heck you talking about? 1, there's no pronunciation in this. 2, he spells LeBron, which is a wacky bit. 3, no one said that records weren't made to be broken. It's just the point is you play the game, and if the record breaks, it breaks, not you play the game to break the record. It's different. The point is to win. And if you break a record in time, that's fine. If you're playing with no regard to the score to just break the record, that's disrespectful to the game. And that's what I took exception to. And last but not least, why do people think I can't hoop, Ant?
Oh, nah, Craig can actually shoot the skin off the basketball. I will not lie about that. If you guys don't recall my game against Linnell, in the hour that we waited for Linnell to show up, Craig and I, we played a game of horse. We shot around. And I'm not going to lie, Craig can shoot. Craig can shoot. Doc Walker can also vouch for Craig.
If you won't believe Ant, believe Doc Walker. Every time I see Doc Walker, he mentions how well I shot the basketball. I can play. That's not really the point, but quit being disrespectful. That's all I'm going to say. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. More at 6:30 on Jason Wright being out as the president of the Commanders. Coming up next, though, it is our linebacker positional group preview pick 6 style. Our series continues, getting you ready for training camp here on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And if you miss any part of the show, we are also available on demand anytime, anywhere via the Hoffman Show podcast. I mean, we're not like available in the future or anything. You can't listen to tomorrow's show yet. That'd be insane. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. How could you listen to it? Anyway, the point is, as soon as the show is over, in fact, as soon as each hour of the show is over, Anthony puts up the podcast. All you got to do is search The Hoffman Show wherever you get yours, and you can hear things like me talking with Chris Russell earlier in the show about Jason Wright's departure, which is how we started the 5 o'clock hour, and available on The Hoffman Show podcast right now. 6 o'clock every day from now and through next Friday, we are previewing a different position group on the Commanders. We're doing it with 6 questions. It's at 6 o'clock, which means it is a pick 6 at 6.
The 6 biggest Commander storylines. It is caught! Delivered at 6 o'clock sharp. It's the pick 6 at 6.
We set out to find a leader, someone who could take this franchise to the next level, build an elite team that consistently competes for championships.
Alrighty, today we are previewing the linebackers of the Washington Commanders. We did O-line and D-line already. Of course, if you want those, check the podcast feed. But we are looking at the linebackers today. So the first question we are asking in each one of these pick 6s is, who are the dudes?
Number 1.
So, who are the dudes? At middle linebacker is a guy you might have heard of. Bobby Wagner, gold jacket pending. Circle back to him in a second. Weak side linebacker, your starter, Frankie Louvu, who was the biggest free agent signing of this offseason for the Commanders. One of the few guys they gave a multi-year deal to. He is a pass rusher. He is a coverage player. He is maybe the best athlete on the field when that defense takes it. Other guys to know, of course, would include the rookie, Jordan McGee, free agent signing, Anthony Pittman, and then you got Bo Bauer, Michael Walker, Keandre Jones, and Jamin Davis. Yeah, that's an interesting one. We'll talk about him a little bit more as we get going. But those are the actual players. And then you get to the second most important thing in terms of personnel, which is
Number 2.
Who's the coach? Ken Norton Jr. is the coach. Ken Norton Jr. is an incredibly accomplished coach and, of course, was a tremendous player. He's a Super Bowl champion as a player back in the day. Played for the 49ers, 3-time Pro Bowler, was an All-Pro as well. Had 12.5 career sacks, 12 forced fumbles, and over 1,100 solo tackles in his 13-year career split between the Niners and the Cowboys. Norton is a guy who brings tremendous personal experience, but then obviously tremendous coaching experience to the table as well. And I think one of the things that was really interesting about Norton in the spring is Dan Quinn had him address the team before the final practice. And Norton was drafted by the Cowboys in 1988. So this is right as Jerry Jones took over the team, and ultimately they build to the Super Bowl rings that they win in the early 90s with the triplets. And some of you are Cowboys fans that you're listening to this, and you're like, yeah, we know that story. And some of you, or most of you probably, are fans of the Burgundy Gold going, yeah, we know that story. But the point is that Norton was there at the precipice. He was there when it got started. And he being Quinn, wanted Norton to talk about what that was like. What it was like to be there at the beginning of building something. And Norton said, I feel like we have some of the pieces here that we had in Dallas back in the day. That this is the kind of foundation we can build on. And so he brings that experience as well, which is pretty fascinating and very valuable. But maybe more than anything else, he is one of the biggest reasons why Bobby Wagner came. Like, obviously, Bobby knows DQ from their time in Seattle together, but he also has a huge respect for Ken Norton. And I think Dan's hiring opened the door for Bobby, and Ken Norton's hiring, from what I've heard, kind of closed it as like, no, I want to go play for that guy. And we'll see where it goes, obviously. But Ken Norton Jr., tremendously important for this linebacking core to help teach Jordan McGee to be the next guy, to get the most out of Luvu, to let Bobby Wagner do his thing, but also put Bobby in the positions he needs to be at this stage of his career, knowing that he's not quite the coverage player he used to be, but is still tremendous as a tackler and still a good coverage player. And then, obviously, to figure out what the heck they do with Jamin and some of the other pieces around. So Ken Norton, tremendously important. Now, I said I'd circle back to Wagner, and this gets us to the next question on our list, which is...
Number 4.
Nope, that's
Number
not
3.
That's what we wanted. Counting. When I drug the mouse across, I hit the wrong.
Number 3.
I know how to count, everybody, especially to 6. You get much higher, fine. I'll let you make fun of me. But to 6, we can do it. I hit the wrong button. Okay, Anthony, I'm going to bring you in early here on this one. Because number 3, the question that we have down for every single position group is who is the best player? And that's actually a really good question here. Because I think both starting linebackers are excellent. And it's, do you take the projection of what we think Frankie Luvu can be, given a better opportunity than he had in Carolina? Like, he was awesome in Carolina. And outside of Derek Brown and Brian Burns, he didn't have a lot around him. Now he's got Allen and Payne. He's got Wagner next to him. We like some of the safeties. Like, there's more here than there was. And, well, there's one of the same safeties is here, and Jeremy Chin. But there's more here than in Carolina. And we think the coaching staff is definitely better here than he had in Carolina. So I think at his ceiling, Frankie Luvu is the best player. But the other guy in consideration here is Bobby freaking Wagner. Bobby Gold Jackets. Bobby Hall of Fame. Who do you think the best player in this linebacker room is?
I'm going to say Bobby Wagner. And I say that just because he's the experienced vet. He's been to multiple Super Bowls. He's played in high-level situations. He's more knowledgeable. I think he's the most knowledgeable probably on the defense.
Might be the most knowledgeable in the whole league.
Yeah. So I lean there. Also, the guy led the league in tackles last season.
Sure did.
Maybe he's a step slower, but I feel like when you know the game, I think you can play, a step ahead just because you can anticipate. I will say Frankie Luvu's I think he's probably going to be the most impactful player just because we'll be able to use him in more roles. But I think Bobby, when you just asked about who's the best player, I think Bobby's the best player. He's also going to be the signal caller most likely with the green dot when it comes to the defense.
So Luvu last year was 22nd in the NFL in tackles. So it wasn't, top 25 guy. He's got 125 for reference. Like Fred Warner had 132.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a guy that would produce at an extraordinarily high level. Patrick Queen had 133. He is tremendously talented and tremendously productive. Wagner, by the way, 183 to lead the league over Zaire at 179. Had Z played in all 17 games, he probably would have had him because he was at 179. So assuming that he would have had another game with 4 or 5 more tackles, he would have gotten it. But Wagner, part of what makes him just remarkable, of the top 10 guys in tackles, he also was tied for the lead in sacks with 3.5. Amongst the top 10 guys in tackles, he was tied with Bobby Okereke from the Giants with 11 tackles for loss. Like, he was still impactful at, around, and behind the line of scrimmage last year. That is really, really mega stuff from a guy who is definitely past his prime. But when you're past your prime, and your prime is one of the 5 to 10 greatest linebackers of all time, like, you're still incredible. You're still one of the 5 best probably in the league if he plays up to that level. 5 to 10 for sure. I think the question is, can Luvu raise his game to match that and surpass that? I would say this. Unless Bobby falls off a cliff, which I don't anticipate happening at all. If Luvu's the best player in this room, that's awesome because that means they've had 2 A-plus seasons. I think that you could also probably say the same thing the other way. If Bobby Wagner plays well enough that he is the best player, I think there's a really good chance that means he had to outplay Luvu having a damn near Pro Bowl type season. Like, these two guys are that good. I think the biggest question really is, what is the role going to be for Luvu? Is he going to be a traditional off-ball linebacker who blitzes a fair amount and gets his sack production that way because we know he's a great pass rusher? Is he going to get some of the Micah Parsons treatment where he lines up over offensive linemen on the line of scrimmage and is basically a pure rusher? How do offenses treat him in terms of their protection rules? So I think that there's a lot of questions about what Luvu is going to be, but ultimately I think either of them could wind up being the best player in this room, and that's ultimately a good thing. Definitely a good thing. There's good options, and it doesn't necessarily even matter. There's no one or the other that I think is a better outcome for this team moving forward. Because if they can, if Bobby has a great season and they retain him and he's here for a couple of years, like, that's awesome. Luvu's already signed up for a couple of years. That could be awesome. So go be great, fellas. Let us worry about who's better. And actually, honestly, we don't care. All right, now time for
Number 4.
biggest wild card. Now we talk about 52. Now we talk about Jamin. This dude could play his way off the roster by the end of camp. I know that sounds crazy, but, like, if they're going to keep 4 linebackers, which sometimes happens, I do think you're probably pushing towards 5, but they have so many safeties. Is there a possibility? Is there a scenario where they keep only 4? And the 4 guys they keep are Wagner, Luvu, Pittman, the veteran they brought in, and McGee, the rookie? I guess. I would be stunned. I mean, not stunned. I'd be very largely surprised if Jamin Davis doesn't make this roster. Or Davis could emerge as his pass rusher, or maybe he redeems himself with better coaching off the ball, and he's playing linebacker like we thought, and they're running some more base. Like, I don't know. The range of outcomes for Jamin Davis feels unlimited, Anthony. I honestly have less of a clue about what to think of him than any other player on this roster, and that includes guys like Emmanuel Forbes, who I have no freaking clue what they're going to do this year.
I mean, coming out of Kentucky, we knew how athletic this guy Jamin was, and I think everybody's just so excited because we've seen what Dan Quinn and Joe Wood Jr. could do with an athletic freak, in Micah Parsons. Even some of the other guys they got, Damone Clark, Marquise Bell, like, they have some athletic linebackers as well. So I think everybody's just super optimistic about, what could be. And it's more so, I think we just hope he actually does live up to these expectations that, like, we're setting for him, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's so hard because I think Del Rio and company at times saw the athleticism. And they're like, oh, he's so athletic. Like, we can trust him in space. And then they put him outside on a running back. And it's like, yeah, he's like, you can trust him in space against a tight end. Like, you can trust him to cover space in a zone. But, like, if he's one-on-one on a rail route down the sideline against a running back who has a head start out of the backfield, like, that's not.
Like Saquon.
Yeah, like, that's not
Not fair.
That's not fair. What are we doing there? So I think that's where I just don't know what to make of Jamin Davis. It definitely seems like they're trying to work him in at that pass rush. They spent a lot of time on it in the spring. And so if he can be a part of their edge rotation, like, that's huge. It gives them versatility. I mean, because can you imagine a 3-4 look on a third down with Newton, Payne, and Allen? Your 3 stud defensive tackles, you're hoping if Allen returns to form, Payne returns to form, Newton is a second-round pick, who many people thought is a first-round talent. Those 3 dudes, and then Davis and Luvu on the edges, and you don't know who's coming off the edge. You can trust the other guy in coverage. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can do there, potentially, from a personnel grouping and formational standpoint. He also could not be good at it. He also could straight up just not be that good at it. And if that's the case, then, you move on from him after the year. So the wild card, no doubt about it, on this roster at linebacker is Jamin Davis.
Number 5.
All right, Ant. For number 5, for those that are new to this every day, in our pick 6 positional group previews. Number 5 is a key question for the group that I don't know the question, and Anthony Haney ultimately asks it. So, Ant, off we go.
All right, so there was a recent poll, or I guess survey, that ESPN did where they ranked our linebackers as the best ranked linebacker duo or crew, I guess.
Yeah.
Group in the NFL. Last year, you look at the Ravens, they had 2 Pro Bowlers. They had Roquan, they had Patrick Queen. 2 years ago, Dre Greenlaw, Fred Warner. When you look at Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu, do you foresee those 2 guys potentially being Pro Bowlers?
Potentially, yes. If I have to make a hard prediction, no. Because what's the common thread between the 49ers and the Ravens of last year?
They're contenders.
Yeah. Not only were they contenders, they were the best team in their conference. I guess so at the time the Pro Bowl voting was happening, the Eagles hadn't collapsed yet. But the 49ers were right there, right? I actually was on Awad's show in Richmond earlier today, and he asked me this question. He goes, over under 2 Pro Bowlers. And I said, under, because I just don't think you get the boost at any position. And like, there's a lot of talent in the league. I do think that these 2 guys are super talented. I do think a guy like Wagner has the name recognition. I do think a lot of people were excited about Louvu. But at the end of the day, is that going to be enough to overcome not being a contender? I mean, they lead the league in tackles, maybe. If the Commanders are a contender, like contender at least for the division, or a surprise team, maybe. Great fan base, so fan vote, maybe. But I would say no.
My thing is, I think Bobby for sure, just because of name recognition. Also, I don't expect his game to drop off too much. I think he'll still be top 5, top 10 tackles. But when you were talking about Frankie and not necessarily playing on all that good of a defense last year and the ways he can be used in a system with Dan Quinn and Joe Witt, I think, the sky's the limit for a guy like him.
I mean, there's a chance that he's pushing, obviously by the end of the year, double-digit sacks.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens when the Pro Bowl voting window closes in December. But it's definitely possible. It's a great question. My prediction would be no, just because it's a stacked enough position. A guy like Warner, at the position, some of the other guys that are around the league. But, Wagner's been one of those guys, and now he's here.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's a very good, interesting question. I'm going to lean towards no. The betting odds, I'm sure, would say no is the favorite, but it's not an unreasonable question. That's for sure. Mike Clay did say it's the best linebacker group in the league, so it's pretty fun. All right, last but not least, we wrap it up with
number 6,
which is who makes the team. Anthony, I'm going to say this one's actually pretty easy. I'm going to say that there's 5 dudes that make the team, and it's the 5 dudes that I already said earlier. It's Bobby Wagner, Jordan McGee, Frankie Louvu, Anthony Pittman, and Jamin Davis. I think Michael Walker is an interesting name to watch. He had a pretty good spring, but ultimately it's a numbers game, and I think there's so many safeties that they're going to want to keep, and those guys are so valuable on teams that unless Walker is just insane and they think he's a better teams player than whoever is the last safety, the last DB on, that you're probably looking at those 5 guys. But, is it 4? Is it 5? That is one of those questions. And also, depending on what happens at, you keep 3 or 4 tight ends, 3 or 4 running backs. That's where that 5th linebacker tends to be a team spot. But that's the 5 that I would probably say wind up making the team.
Yeah. I would maybe lean 4. I think it was and granted, this is a different regime, but I want to say it was either last year or 2 years ago.
Yeah, no, it happened. It happened. But who's the last guy out? Does Jamin not make it?
No, I think Jamin.
You think Pittman doesn't make it?
I think Pittman doesn't make it. I think Pittman doesn't make it. Just because, again, we have so many DBs, and I think they're probably going to want to lean on keeping those guys on the roster.
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
It's definitely possible. But he is a vet they brought in, and that's the kind of thing I pay attention to. I was they brought him here for a reason.
Yeah.
So we'll see if he ultimately makes the final cut. All right, that is our linebacker positional group preview. Every single day we're doing this, so if you miss one, just go check the Hoffman Show podcast, the start of hour 3, and Anthony's clipping it in its own segment as well. Nice and easy for you. When we get back, we circle back to the news of the day. Jason Wright out. Where do the Commanders go from here as they search for their next team president? It's the Hoffman Show on the team at 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And in the final half hour of the show here, we will hit the best thing on the show today, as well as our, Anthony, is there an immediate thing that comes to mind for best thing on the show today?
Probably something from your obituary.
That was good. I also feel like there's some funny moments and never read the comments. Not that it always has to be funny. We can showcase multiple platforms in the show, and the best thing happened on today. But I do like when things are funny. There's some funny, wacky bits, and never read the comments.
There were some.
So I think you defending my basketball honor is definitely an option.
Definitely.
So best thing on the show today.
Why do people think you can't ball, Craig?
I don't know. Probably because I'm white. When
You can shoot then, if that's the case.
do more than shoot, Anthony. Actually, I don't know. Maybe I can't play anymore. Honestly, I haven't played in so long. Maybe I suck now. Maybe the internet trolls are right.
Nah, once a shooter, always a shooter, man. It never goes away. It's like riding a bike.
Okay. I do need to come up to prep or
Hey,
shoot.
we get some shots up, man.
You shooting around this weekend?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay. Let's talk about that after the show. I'm very excited for that. All right. But anyway, also real things real people said in real microphones, including a very funny thing I sent Anthony at the very end of the show yesterday that we did not get to. What does Lewis Hamilton smell like? You'll find out in real things real people said in real microphones. But top story of the day for sure is that Jason Wright is exiting the Commanders organization. He is immediately out as team president, transitioning to a senior advisor role, and he is going to leave the organization by the end of 2024. I do think that one of the big projects he'll continue to work on is the stadium, which in its own way, Anthony, is kind of hilarious because what was the thing that we kept hearing at the end of the Bruce Allen era?
About the RFK Stadium?
Bruce is invaluable on the state. His political connections. You know, they might fire him. Dan might finally fire him as the football guy, but he'll stick around as the stadium guy.
Yeah.
He didn't. He and Dan got in a big kerfuffle, and he went out to one of his houses and has never been heard from again. Except for his emails being leaked, and boy, are those bad. At least the ones that we found out about from that NFL thing. It would be, depending on how a couple lawsuits go, might find out more. But anyway, point is, Jason has been working diligently, from my understanding, on the stadium stuff that's been like one of his biggest projects for the last year. And going back to his days at McKinsey, like he knows a lot of people on Capitol Hill, and so he has been having a lot of discussions, not only there about RFK, but I know they've met as a team. They've met with Maryland at times. They've met with Virginia, and I think they are well positioned to move quickly as stadium stuff moves once they're ready to make a decision. But it also wouldn't surprise me if Josh Harris, now a year into this, knowing like more likely than not he was going to move on from Jason Wright at the end of this first year. You know, they said from go, we're going to give everybody in the football side the season, and we're basically going to give everybody on the business side a year. And I'm guessing they've known for a while that they wanted to move on from Jason and revamp things because and then at that point, you probably want the new person to come in and check the work. You want before you commit to anything. And also right now, they haven't unlocked the RFK site. They still are deciding between Virginia and Maryland. Because RFK is just not a feasible option because the land hasn't been released by the federal government back to the district so that the commanders can negotiate with the district over it. So we'll see where that ultimately goes. We'll see if Jason, that can be his parting gift. That would be very nice if he can help be a part of the team and the group of people with Josh, with Magic Johnson, with whoever else is involved from the ownership group. I assume, Mitch Rales, Mark Ian, they're longtime DC guys. Do they have the connections? Do they have the political capital to get something done? We shall see. Also, the savvy to negotiate whatever the heck they need to negotiate with Steve Daines, who's currently the one senator who's single-handedly holding this thing up. So that's worth pointing out as well. I don't know how involved Wright is there, but certainly he could be. I think a couple of things real quick to kind of recap some things that we've said, but also put a different spin on them before we look forward. And, I said earlier in the show, when we were talking with Russell, like Jason deserves credit for professionalizing the organization on the business side in terms of they hired a bunch of new people, they created some positions that needed to exist, they did a lot of stuff. What I don't know is if they actually filled those people and set up those systems optimally. And that would be the thing that I'm really curious to hear about a year from now, right? So in the next couple of months, they will hire someone. That someone, I presume, will have experience running a sports organization. And whether it's someone who has maybe even Josh hires someone who works at the Sixers or the Devils and goes that route. If I were him, I'd be looking elsewhere in the NFL, potentially even in the league office. There's a variety of different people that have been talked about at a variety of different points to join the Commanders organization. Some of which they've actually hired already to different positions that could be capable of that. But they've clearly got good connections in the league office and know who the smart people are. And they've already poached a couple of major names, Dave Gardy, et cetera, amongst others. So do they ultimately wind up pulling someone from the league office who knows the landscape of the partnerships, maybe someone who's been involved on the NFL side of trying to get the RFK site? And then how much turnover happens once that person's in place? Because just because Jason dug them out of the hole doesn't mean he actually built something spectacular. All he might have done is fill in the hole with dirt. And that's better than leaving the hole. But what I don't want to do is in saying Jason did a good job of at least getting them out of the hole, pretend like I have enough insight, knowledge, whatever, to then memorialize his tenure as he leaves as he built the Taj Mahal. Because that I don't get the impression that that's the case. Because if for no other reason, if he had built the Taj Mahal of business operations, then they probably wouldn't have not fired him, but they probably wouldn't be moving on from him. They wouldn't say, thank you for your time. We appreciate your service. We're going to go in a different direction. You let the man who builds the Taj Mahal keep building. And I think, Anthony, what we'll see over the next year is a lot more turnover on the business side of the organization and then hopefully stability. Because I will say under Jason, while there was a lot of necessary turnover at the beginning, there has been a lot of unnecessary turnover as it's continued. They've had a really hard time hanging on to people, and that is not a sign of a optimally functioning organization.
I'm not 100% sure, how the presidential role in like these franchises are supposed to work. But I feel like when Jason Wright was brought in, I don't think he had the most traditional, objection of like being a president. Like he had to be the face of a franchise that was spiraling to an extent just because of, who our previous owner was. And I feel like, with the new president, what is, I guess, his main objective is going to be? Like, are we bringing?
Great question.
Like, that's more so like what I'm curious to know and like learn. Just because if the main objective is the RFK Stadium site, then obviously like whoever we do bring in, I hope we eventually can accomplish that. Because again, a lot of fans have been wanting and eager just for us to get that site back because it just means so much. But I'm not necessarily sure if that was Jason Wright's sole purpose when he first got his
when
job.
Jason got here, his sole purpose was crisis management.
Yeah.
And that's why he was hired, right? Jason was doing crisis management at McKinsey. They were talking to him about handling it with McKinsey, and ultimately they hired him away from McKinsey to just do it in-house. And Jason then obviously, I think, thought himself capable of doing a lot of other things, and maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But ultimately now, if you're like, okay, you got through the crisis part, we don't need the crisis management guy. What's the guy we need? We need the stadium guy. Because designing and building a stadium is a lot more than just like getting the land and dealing with the municipalities. Like, okay, well, now what do you want the stadium to look like? What are your priorities in terms of facilities for fans, facilities for players, ease of access for fans and players? Like, there's a lot more beyond. Like, we haven't gotten to that stuff because as a community, if you will, of people who talk about the team, because we haven't hit the where yet, and the where is the first step. Well, the geography is the first thing that matters, but ultimately, the next person needs to know what buttons to press and have an understanding and be able to build a relationship with the football side to understand what that stadium needs to look like, but also have a business acumen that expands way beyond football. Like, it is a joke that we are the nation's capital with one of the highest fandoms of soccer in the country, and we are not hosting a World Cup game in 2026. You better believe that international soccer games will be on the list of things inputted into the stadium design of the next Commander Stadium. You better believe that concerts are a big part of, hey, we want to be a destination that Taylor Swift and Beyonce and every other artist on down wants to hit on their stadium. If they do 12 shows in America in stadiums, we're going to be 1A and 1B with SoFi Stadium on the list. Like, that's what they're going to be trying to build. And the person in charge of that project's really important. And either the president that they hire will be directly in charge of that, or they're going to hire the person in charge of that. And either way, that president becomes an essential hire. Then you've got, hey, we need to repair our relationship with our fans, which is an ongoing process that the Harris Group has done a really good job of. We need to make sure that our alumni relations are good. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our players. We need to make sure that our sponsorship game is good. We need to make sure that, because it's Washington, D.C., that our connections with Capitol Hill are strong, that if we need anything, whether it's through the District of Columbia, whether D.C. city government, whether it's some of the weird, wacky stuff that just happens in D.C., not to mention from a business standpoint, like, you always want to have, friends on Capitol Hill, especially when you're in D.C. So, like, there's a lot of different factors, but I think ultimately understanding the NFL, understanding the business model, and having, because that is something that's new to the Harris Group, right? They've operated in the NBA, they've operated in the NHL, but someone who knows the NFL business model intimately at the highest levels, and someone who either knows the right people to hire to build a state-of-the-art, multi-purpose, but football-first stadium, or is that person themselves is kind of the resume that you're looking for. All right, when we get back here on the Hoffman Show, the best thing from the show today, and real things real people said in the real microphones. It's the Hoffman Show wrapping up here on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Loaded show today. Lots of commentary on Jason Wright leaving the Commanders. The show started with our obituary for the Wright era. We talked to Chris Russell about it at 5 p.m. We just had a great chat about what's next at 6:30. So all of that is podcasted for you, or will be very shortly in the last segment's case, at the Hoffman Show podcast. But also in that podcast, you can hear the best thing that happened on the show today, which is during Never Read the Comments, Anthony was called upon to defend my honor, and he stepped up to the plate. And last but not least, why do people think I can't hoop, Ant?
Oh, nah, Craig can actually shoot the skin off the basketball. I will not lie about that. If you guys don't recall my game against Linnell and the hour that we waited for Linnell to show up, Craig and I, we played a game of horse. We shot around. And I'm not going to lie, Craig can shoot. Craig can shoot. Doc Walker can also vouch for Craig.
If you won't believe Ant, believe Doc Walker. Every time I see Doc Walker, he mentions how well I shot the basketball. I can play. That's not really the point, but quit being disrespectful. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah, just people's ability to play the sports they talk about is not really how sports commentary works. But also, why are people coming after me? I just, I got good takes and good game.
I think
what you gonna say now, internet haters?
I think when we shoot around, when we get some shots up, I think you can just show them.
Okay, that is honestly more my style. I'm forced to talk about it, because I talk for a living.
Yeah,
this is the forum that I have been given. But I am more of a show you kind of person.
Yeah,
that really is my okay, watch me.
Watch out, y'all.
This weekend, I do think the timing is going to work out. I do think that I'll be able to meet you to get some shots up. Sunday
does not work. I have football practice.
Dang.
I know. Saturday's
a little dicier. We'll figure it out.
All right.
I have faith in us. And tomorrow on the show is all the stuff we were going to talk about today. And then Jason Wright.
We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we do. We got WNBA All-Star and Caitlin Clark and Sabrina Ionescu not doing the three-point contest. Definitely have thoughts on that. What else were we going to have?
Definitely got to talk about the ESPN Top 100
the ESPN
list.
Top 100.
Compare our list.
Compare our list. Yep. No, we got to do that. We have number 6 on our countdown of top 10 most important commanders. We doing running backs tomorrow, Anthony,
yes.
I believe. Running backs tomorrow on positional group previews. So loaded up on a Friday, and we don't even have any guests scheduled yet. See if what Yates is doing coming off of MLB All-Star. See if he's got thoughts on anything. I know he's got some Jason Wright takes. So we might have Yates tomorrow as well. What do we do right now? Well, it's the same thing we do every day to end the show. It's real things, real people said in real microphones.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5 and 11. Not very good.
Said into real microphones.
The culture is actually damn good.
All right, I found this yesterday in the final break before Real Things, and I tried to send it to Anthony in time, and it did not get there. So this is from, now I can't remember the name of the podcast. I'll look it up because it's so funny. I want to make sure that they get the credit here. Anthony, do you have it in front of you?
It is the Fast Curious podcast.
The Fast Curious podcast.
Fast and the Curious.
Fast and the Curious podcast. It's a Formula One podcast, and they got a question about Lewis Hamilton, and boy, did they answer it.
I would like to know what Lewis Hamilton smells like.
Well, to sum up, rich. But more specifically...
I'll answer the question. I like a sweeter smelling aftershave, not like old-fashioned Old Spice off of the wall. Like a slightly more modern, sweeter smelling. And that is genuinely what Lewis Hamilton smells like. He has a sweet scent to him. And when he came up to me in Miami last year wearing a purple sequins number, which the way I describe it makes it sound like Dame Edna, but was genuinely looked amazing. The first thing I noticed, and we were outside in the pen, and I was like, oh my God, he smells amazing. So I can definitely confirm, and I'd like a cheer from this. So Lewis Hamilton smells amazing, everybody.
What does he feel like to the touch?
He's got soft hands. I've shaken his hands.
Soft hands.
Soft hands.
There you go. Rich could have guessed that. I think that is something that happens. Like, I think, Anthony, we probably just smell like we don't have a smell, as far as I know. Like, I'm not like, oh, I smell Anthony coming around the corner, good or bad. That's a good thing. I hope either I'm about to learn something terrible about myself, or I don't either. But I do think that when you're rich, that's something that you have.
Yeah, like you can smell it. Yeah, from a mile away.
It's just like you get to a certain point where you're like, I can buy obscenely expensive cologne and it doesn't really affect my bank account because I have so much money. It doesn't matter. And so I'm going to do that. There might be a whole level of soap and body wash that we don't even know exists because it's not in our budget.
What I will tell you though is, Craig, when you just get out the shower and you come into the studio, I definitely do smell your
the body wash and the shampoo or something.
I smell all that, yeah.
And it smells good?
It smells really good.
I have bad news for me though. I'm not rich. See you tomorrow!